Story 1. Alex had always thought his suburb and neighborhood was safe, until he realized someone was always watching. For most of his life, 22-year-old Alex had lived in the bustling, noisy heart of the city. So when he moved into a quiet, tree-lined suburban town for college, the silence was a welcome change. The small rental house was perfect, with a neat lawn and friendly, albeit distant, neighbors. The kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and children played in the streets until dusk. It felt like an escape, a peaceful heaven to focus on his studies. But peace, as Alex would soon discover, is a fragile thing. One of his neighbors was a man named Mr. Simmons, who lived in the house directly across the street. He was in his late 50s, a recluse who rarely left his property. Alex would see him sometimes, a fleeting shape in the window, a curtain quickly drawn shut. At first, Alex dismissed it as the simple curiosity of an old man with nothing better to do. He'd wave if he caught Mr. Simmons' eye, but the man never waved back. He would just stand there, a motionless silhouette, watching. As the weeks turned into a month, the casual observation started to feel more like surveillance. Every time Alex left for class, returned from the grocery store, or even just went to check the mail, he could feel Mr. Simmons's gaze on him. The constant, silent scrutiny began to burrow under his skin, turning the once peaceful neighborhood into a stage where he was the unwilling main actor. Then, the strange incidents began. They were small things at first, easily explainable. He'd come home to find his front door, which he was certain he had locked, slightly ajar. A book he'd left on the coffee table would be on the kitchen counter instead. He brushed it off as his own forgetfulness, the consequence of a stressful semester. But then, a favorite hoodie went missing from his laundry basket. A few days later, he found a long, deep scratch running along the side of his car, a deliberate act of vandalism. The feeling of being watched intensified, evolving into a chilling certainty that someone had been violating his personal space. Paranoia began to set in. He started double-checking the locks, peering out his own windows, his home no longer feeling like a sanctuary. Fed up and determined to get answers, Alex bought a small, discreet hidden camera and positioned it on his bookshelf, its lens aimed directly at his front door and living room window. He let the camera run for a few days, his anxiety mounting with each passing hour. One evening, after a particularly unnerving day, where he felt eyes on him the entire time he was mowing his lawn, he decided he couldn't wait any longer. He sat down at his computer and began to review the footage. His heart pounded in his chest as he fast-forwarded through hours of an empty, silent room. Then he saw it. The footage from the previous night showed a figure standing outside his window. It was Murdoch Simmons. He wasn't just glancing over. He was peering inside, his face pressed close to the glass, his eyes scanning the room for what felt like an eternity. The camera caught him doing this at multiple times throughout the night, at 1 a.m., 3 a.m., and again just before sunrise. The footage also captured him walking slowly around the perimeter of Alex's backyard, testing the back door and lingering in the shadows. It wasn't just odd, it was obsessive. The very next night, Alex was jolted awake by a noise from downstairs. It was a faint creak, the sound of a floorboard settling under weight. But he knew, with a terrifying certainty, that it wasn't the house settling. Someone was inside. His blood ran cold. He grabbed his phone, his hands shaking so violently he could barely dial 911. He locked his bedroom door and whispered to the operator that an intruder was in his house, giving them his address and a description of his neighbor. The minutes he spent waiting for the police felt like a lifetime, every creak and rustle from downstairs amplifying his terror. When the police finally arrived, they found Mr. Simmons in the kitchen, standing perfectly still, holding one of Alex's college textbooks. He was arrested without a struggle. A search of his home revealed the true depth of his obsession. The police found dozens of journals filled with detailed notes on Alex's daily schedule, what he ate, who he spoke to. They also discovered hand-drawn maps of Alex's house, with entry and exit points marked, along with disturbing annotations about his habits. Alex thought he was safe in his suburban home, but sometimes the person living next door is the real nightmare story too. In a quiet neighborhood, a child disappeared, and nobody knew who had taken him. For Sarah, a 35-year-old mother, the suburbs were supposed to be the ideal place to raise her son. The community was tight-knit, the schools were excellent, and the biggest danger seemed to be a scraped knee from a bicycle fall. Her 6-year-old son, Ethan, loved playing in their manicured front yard, his laughter a familiar and comforting sound that echoed through the peaceful afternoon air. It was a typical Tuesday. The sun was warm, and Ethan was busy in his own world, lining up his toy soldiers on the edge of the lawn. Sarah was watching him from the front porch, enjoying the moment of tranquility. She only stepped inside for a moment, just long enough to answer a phone call she'd been expecting. The call lasted no more than 2 minutes. When she hung up and walked back to the front door, a sudden, chilling silence greeted her. The toy soldiers were still there, abandoned in their formation, but Ethan was gone. A wave of panic washed over her. Ethan. She called out, her voice trembling. No answer. She ran out onto the lawn, her eyes scanning the street in every direction. She checked the backyard, behind the bushes, and called his name over and over, each unanswered call escalating her fear. He was simply gone. Within minutes, the quiet street was filled with the wail of police sirens. The investigation began immediately. Officers went door to door, canvassing the entire neighborhood, asking the same questions. Did you see anything? Did you notice anyone unfamiliar? But the answers were always the same. No one had seen a thing. It was as if Ethan had vanished into thin air. Days turned into a week, and the hope that had sustained Sarah began to crumble, replaced by a gnawing, unbearable dread. The neighborhood, once a symbol of safety, now felt menacing. Every passing car, every unfamiliar face, was a potential threat. The police investigation had stalled, with no leads and no suspects. Then, a breakthrough came from an unlikely source. A neighbor who lived a few streets over, an elderly woman who rarely left her home, belatedly came forward. She told detectives that on the day Ethan disappeared, she had seen something from her upstairs window. A man she didn't recognize had been walking down the street, carrying a small boy who matched Ethan's description. He had put the child into a nondescript white van and driven away. She hadn't thought much of it at the time, assuming it was a father with his son. But as news of the disappearance spread, a terrible realization dawned on her. The man she described was someone who had recently moved into a rental property in the area, a quiet man who kept to himself. Armed with this new information, the police traced the van's registration. It led them to a dilapidated, abandoned property on the outskirts of a nearby town. A tactical team swarmed the location, their hearts pounding with a mix of hope and fear. Inside a dark, filthy basement, they found him. Ethan was there, physically unharmed but deeply terrified, huddled in a corner with several other missing children. The kidnapper, the man who had been living in plain sight among them, was apprehended at the scene. He had been quietly operating from the heart of their suburban community for months, his friendly, unassuming facade a perfect cover for the predator lurking beneath. The families were reunited, but the illusion of suburban safety was shattered forever. Sometimes the suburban streets hide more than quiet nights, they hide predators who watch, wait, and strike. Story 3. When Jason started receiving strange calls at night, he thought it was just a prank until it wasn't. Jason, a 28-year-old graphic designer, loved the freedom of working from home. He had recently moved into a charming 2-story house in a sleepy suburban cul-de-sac. His days were spent in creative focus, and his nights were peaceful, his stark contrast to the city apartment he'd left behind. The neighborhood was so quiet that the only sounds after dark were the chirping of crickets and the distant hum of the highway. For the first few months, it was paradise. The first call came on a Tuesday, at exactly 2 a.m. Jason was sound asleep when the shrill ring of his phone jolted him awake. He fumbled for it on his nightstand, his mind groggy. He answered with a mumbled hello, but was met with silence. Not empty silence, but a heavy, static-filled quiet, punctuated by what sounded like faint, ragged breathing on the other end. Thinking it was a wrong number or a bad connection, he hung up and tried to go back to sleep. But the next night, at the same time, the phone rang again. It was the same unknown number. This time, he answered with an annoyed, "Who is this?" Again, only heavy breathing replied. A cold unease began to creep over him. He hung up, his heart beating a little faster. The calls became a nightly ritual. Always at 2 a.m. Always the same unknown number. Always the same terrifying, raspy breathing. Jason tried blocking the number, but the calls would then come from a new, equally anonymous one. The prank, if it was one, was becoming more sinister. One night, the breathing on the other end was accompanied by a new sound, the faint crunch of footsteps on gravel. Jason's blood ran cold as he realized the sound was coming from his own driveway. He leaped out of bed and rushed to the window, but saw nothing but darkness. The calls were no longer just calls. They were announcements. Someone was outside his house, letting him know they were there. He felt like a prisoner in his own home, the nightly ring of the phone a harbinger of his personal tormentor. Terrified, Jason decided to fight back. He installed a state-of-the-art security system with motion-detecting floodlights and high-definition cameras covering every angle of his property. For a few nights, the calls stopped, and a fragile sense of relief began to settle in. He thought he had scared them off. But then, one night, his phone buzzed with a notification from his security app. Motion detected at the back patio. He pulled up the live feed on his phone, his breath catching in his throat. A tall, slender figure was standing completely still on his patio, their face obscured by the shadows of a hoodie. The figure wasn't trying to break in. They were just standing there, staring directly into the camera, which was positioned right next to his living room window. After a long, chilling minute, the figure slowly raised a hand and waved before melting back into the darkness. The police came and swept the area, but found no trace of the intruder. On their advice, Jason changed his phone number and reinforced his doors and windows. Months passed in an easy silence. The calls had stopped, and no more figures appeared on his cameras. Jason slowly began to believe the nightmare was over. He started to sleep through the night again. Then, one morning, he woke up to a notification for a new voicemail. He hadn't given his new number to anyone but his family and a few close friends. With a sense of dread, he played the message. It wasn't the sound of heavy breathing. It was a recording. A recording of his own soft snoring, the distinct sound of him sleeping in his own bed. The audio was crystal clear, as if it had been recorded from right beside him while he slept. Even in a suburban paradise, privacy and safety can vanish in the blink of an eye. These stories prove that horror doesn't always lurk in dark forests or abandoned buildings. Sometimes it's in the homes next door, the streets you walk every day. Stay alert, because suburban nightmares can be closer than you think.